We're going to start the program now, since we are 6 minutes into past 4. I'd like to welcome everyone here today. My name is Amy Harris, coming to you from the great state of Connecticut and the fascinating city of Bristol, which is the home of ESPN. I'm guessing that you, like me, have been to many forums, teach-ins, rallies, protests, made innumerable calls to mobilize and pressure our elected officials to demand a ceasefire in Gaza in the past few weeks. We want to focus today specifically on the role of the U.S. left. Before I go further, let me talk a little bit about the League of Revolutionary Struggle History Group, the sponsors of today's forum. The LRS History Group is made up of former members and supporters of the League of Revolutionary Struggle. This organization was formed in the late 70s with the merger of an Asian group, IWK, Iwar-Kun, and a Chicano group, August 29th Movement, ATM. The Revolutionary Communist League, a predominantly Black organization, merged shortly thereafter. We were part of what's called the New Left. What distinguished us from other organizations at that time was our composition. We were predominantly working class people of color. Our leadership consisted mostly of women of color. And our mass work was based primarily in oppressed nationality communities and in the lower strata of the working class. We hold forums such as these to both give our analyses and to hear yours. We seek mutual sharing of lessons, experiences, and analysis. For our discussion today, we want to talk about the situation in Palestine and focus on what this means for the left and our struggle here. The genocidal actions by Israel are creating the conditions for mass consciousness raising as people try to understand the slaughter and the response by governments, organizations, and individuals. This can be an opening to revolutionary forces. However, that can only happen if we have the infrastructure to channel this political awakening. The events of the last few weeks should not only be waking people up to the plight of the Palestinians, but it should also be underscoring the need for organization among those who consider themselves leftists, as well as the realization that we do not have that full infrastructure now. We're going to address our panelists for just about an hour. And feel free to use the chat to drop in your questions, comments as we go along. Feel free to drop in the chat your name, pronouns, who you are, where you're from, anything else of interest. I'd like to introduce our panelists now. Bill Gallegos is a Chicano revolutionary activist, author, speaker, and organizer. He is a former member of the League of Revolutionary Struggle, where he was in leadership. Welcome, Bill, and how are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you, Amy, and hello, everyone. And I just want to add to my bio that I'm currently a member of Liberation Road.
Thank you, Bill. Our other panelist is Bill Fletcher. Bill, hold on. Bill is also a longtime labor activist and a socialist. He has been active in racial justice and international issues. He is an editorial board member and columnist for Black Commentator and a senior scholar for the Institute for Policy Studies. Welcome, Bill. How are you today? And is there a point or two you'd like to add?
No, thank you, Amy. I'm really pleased to be on. Sorry I was running a little late. The only thing that is of any importance to add is that I'm a fanatic follower of Star Trek.
My sincere apologies for omitting that.
The bath, he's got the Bath of Khan.
That's right. There you go.
We have a third panelist who apparently is lost on the information superhighway because, you know, entrances, exits, all kind of stuff. Hopefully she will be able to join us. We're going to be covering a lot of fairly significant, heavy stuff today. And if you're coming in and possibly thinking, I don't know what the hell these people are talking about, that's fine. That's why we're here. We need to learn from each other. We need to share with each other. But if you're here, you were invited. So on some level, we feel you can benefit and add to this work. I'd like to start out with a question for you, Bill G. The ongoing Israeli assault, the genocide on Palestinians in Gaza has brought out many questions and much debate among the left. We are debating questions on self-determination, how we view Hamas, and trying to figure out how we explain, educate, and organize people around these issues. The situation reminds me of the stark descriptions of colonialism in Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. He describes the brutality, the violence, and the despair of colonialism. I think everyone on this call understands that the Hamas assault needs to be understood in the larger context of Palestinian oppression. Calling for self-determination is everywhere, even in the mainstream media. As communists and socialists, we need to underscore how the concept of self-determination is tied to our understanding of the national question and the importance of land in defining a nation. Part of this understanding helps to determine if groups that are national in form can be a part of a revolutionary movement, or are they definitionally reactionary and bourgeois? Bill, you've been a Chicano activist for many years and done both theoretical and organizing work on the Chicano national question. Can you explain what the Chicano nation is? And is it the same kind of nation and talk of self-determination as we are discussing when we talk about Palestine?
Well, thank you, Amy. I just want to open by saying that as a revolutionary, um, and a longtime supporter of the Palestine liberation struggle, I have to denounce the Hamas's slaughter of unarmed civilians. I just want to make that clear, that that is a line that revolutionaries do not cross, and on that, we stand strongly with the African National Congress when a similar situation occurred in South Africa. The Chicano movement actually has a long-standing history of solidarity with the Palestine liberation struggle that was largely taken at the initiative of Partido La Raza Unida, one of the revolutionary nationalist organizations that emerged in the 1960s, primarily in the Southwest, and was one of the first organizations that broke publicly with the Democratic Party and actually won the city council, the entire city council in a South Texas state called Crystal City. And they sent delegations to meet with the Palestinians and began to really raise the issue of Palestine. And part of this was just based on, the internationalism that was really becoming a dominant character part of the Chicano liberation struggle, but also because of some commonalities in our history. So folks may be aware that in the 1840s, the United States waged a war against a very young Mexican nation. It just had recently won its independence from Spain and annexed more than half of its territories, its northern territories. And is one of the factors in enabling the United States to become the superpower empire it is today. It allowed for the massive expansion of its white settler population, the access to and development of a port system that facilitated trade with the Pacific Rim, a huge acquisition of natural resources, including fossil fuels, some of the most fertile agricultural lands in the world. And the population that lived there was indigenous or Mexican, and especially in the areas where we're largely concentrated now. Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Southern Colorado, and California. And once that conquest happened, there was a systematic effort as part of the consolidation with the capitalist system in the US of creating all the primary structures of inequality and oppression for the Chicano people. Central to that was the loss of our land. Millions of acres of land were taken either by force or through a bogus legal system that operated only in English for a Spanish-speaking population, as well as a campaign of terrorism and lynching. And it's estimated that the Texas Rangers, just in Texas alone, as many as 5,000 Chicanos were lynched. That's a part of our history that's never very well known. And all of the structures of oppression were put in place. So the fact that we live in barrios, primarily in barrios, was because of segregation. The fact that we are pretty much left with a undervalued, underfunded school system is a part of that. The lack of political representation, the right to vote, the suppression of language and culture. Very, very similar to the apartheid system that the Israelis have created with the Palestinians. And of course, at the heart of that conquest of Palestine was the theft of the Palestinian lands that continues to this day. And this latest war in Gaza has somewhat obscured the fact that it has accelerated the dispossession of Palestinians in the West Bank. They have armed settler, what I would call terror squads, armed groups of settlers supported by the Israeli military who continue the theft and dispossession of Palestinian land. And the goal here, just as it was with the United States, the goal of the United States was from sea to shining sea. And the goal of the Zionists is from the sea, what is the slogan?
From the river to the sea.
From the river to the sea. That's it. So there's language oppression, cultural oppression, political oppression, economic oppression, land dispossession, mass killings and slaughter, mass incarceration. When we hear about the hostage swap, there's thousands of Palestinians in Israeli jails who've never even been charged with anything. That sound familiar with the immigration system that we have in this country, where people are just rounded up because they may lack papers? So there's a connection here in terms of people who have been dispossessed. Were not allowed to evolve as part of the Mexican nation. Now a militarized border was established, but because of racism and white supremacy, was not allowed to evolve as part of the dominant white population here. So Chicanos are unique. We're one of those things that's not that uncommon in the era of imperialism, the development of new nations. And that's what happened with the Chicano people, primarily in the Southwest. We still live overwhelmingly 90% in our historic areas of concentration along the southwestern border with Mexico. So there's a lot of kinship in terms of the Palestinians fighting for their national rights, but in their case, even to be recognized as human beings. This struggle it's not just for dignity and civil rights. It's for not to be considered vermin, and somewhat similar to the term that Donald Trump used when he was describing Mexican immigrants. So yes, there's this commonality that exists, and there's a fairly long recent history of solidarity. And it's interesting now how this breaks down in terms of classes, because young Chicano activists are strongly supportive of the Palestinians and against the Zionist genocide going on in Gaza. But a lot of our politicians, our elected officials, immediately jumped out to support the Israelis and even to oppose calls for the ceasefire, totally supporting the policies of the Biden administration. So there's a class struggle going on around this issue that could have important implications as we go into the 2024 elections.
Thank you, Bill. That actually leads right into the next question for Bill Fletcher. This question I've been working on and basically had my ear to the news up until we went live here, because every minute we have some more atrocious response from the government. Our government and the ruling class as a whole seems to be showing divisions and cracks in its support for Israel. This is due in part to the massive show of outrage domestically and internationally over the assaults on Gaza. The last poll I heard indicated 66% of the US population wants a ceasefire. Just this morning, the media reported, I can't even say this with a straight face, the media reported that Biden has, quote, expressed unease over Israel's failure to reduce civilian casualties. If it weren't so tragic and fatal, it would just be, I don't know, ridiculous. Congress voted on December 5th, a Republican-led resolution that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism on a 311-14 vote with 92 Dems voting present. We know that they voted to oppose the UN resolution. Bill, what are your thoughts on how the powers that be are thinking about this issue, about public pressure, and any other thing on this issue that comes up to you at this point?
Yeah, thank you. By the way, I'm concerned that about our third guest because she's not responding to her text messages. So I'm hoping that everything is okay.
Does anyone have Elly's phone number? And if so, could you call her? Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So the problem is, Amy, that there's like a short answer and a longer answer. And being who I am, I'm going to give you the longer answer. I think it all begins with that it's very important to distinguish Zionism, anti-Zionism from anti-Semitism. That Zionism as a political current emerges in the late 19th century in Europe in response to, it was a essentially right-wing response to the anti-Semitism that Jews were facing from basically from the Ural Mountains to the Atlantic Ocean in Europe. The pogroms, all kinds of persecution, etc. And the emergence of the movement, which was a political current, and that's the thing to really emphasize, it was a political current, and it was one of many political currents among European Jews, emerges and aligns itself with colonialism. And it seeks a homeland for Jews. And it does so by reaching out to the major imperialist powers at the time, particularly, they reached out to Turkey, Britain, and Germany, I believe, among others. And they looked for a homeland, and this is where we have to get through this. The idea that that Palestine was always and forever the sought-after homeland, and that simply wasn't true. That in the late 19th century, early 20th century, in addition to Palestine, Uganda and Argentina were also considered. And as I've repeatedly said, I've read the Bible, and I don't remember any reference in the Old Testament to Uganda or Argentina. So it was a colonial project. There were also later discussions that the Nazis picked up on about putting all Jews on the island of Madagascar. So it was a political current, and it wasn't the main political current among Jews until after the Holocaust, and for very obvious reasons. It was after World War II that a number of things happened, one of the most important being tremendous guilt within Christian Europe about what they had allowed to happen to the Jews. And I say allowed to happen, it's really important that we don't just look at what the Germans did, but we look at the complicity of most of Europe in the Holocaust. and that they were prepared to allow Jews to be liquidated. But after World War II, there was a lot of feeling about this. They also didn't want Jews to remain in Europe for the most part. And so there was this decision essentially to support a colonial project in what was then called the Palestine Mandate. And at that point in the late 1940s, there were divisions within the US ruling class about whether or not to support a Israeli state. This is something that most of us don't know. It's not really discussed. You get the sense that there was always almost unanimity within the US ruling class. There wasn't. There were divisions, and part of the divisions, the divisions weren't because anyone really gave a damn about the Palestinians, but there really were divisions about issues of global strategy and oil. And the issue of oil was something that also preoccupied the British, during World War II and after World War II. So there were these big divisions that break out. But under Truman's wing of the ruling class came down in favor of supporting the formation of Israel. And other countries did as well, including the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union did so for its own reasons, which were terrible. And so you have this division that essentially is there, but then it gets brought together. And there were many people in the United States that supported the formation of Israel because they looked at the Holocaust, but they also either looked down their noses at the Arabs because of the feudalism and corruption, or because of racism. And one of the questions that I've always asked Zionists is, if you wanted a homeland, why didn't they divide up Germany and give part of Germany to Jews, or part of Poland for that matter, because the Poles don't get off that easily. And no one seems to be able to answer that question or want to answer that question. Between 1948 and 1967, the relationship between US and Israel was complicated. And it was demonstrated by 1956, when the Israelis, French, and the British invaded Egypt. And Eisenhower did something that no president has done since, which is that he told all three to get the hell out of Egypt, which was really quite remarkable. And they did. But it was after the Six-Day War in 1967 that you see a sort of, I don't know the best how to describe it, but the divisions that had existed seem to disappear. And there's close unity within the US ruling forces around supporting Israel, including failing to take Israel on its devastating attack on the USS Liberty in 1967, in which US sailors were killed. And that's what we've been living with. What's interesting about this moment is, and then I'll shut up. What's interesting about this moment is that what happens is that the long-time anti-Zionist agitation and organizing seems to have had this effect, but also within US ruling circles, there are growing divisions, recognizing that that there will be no peace in the Middle East, and frankly, no peace on this planet, until there is a just resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And there are different theories about how that needs to happen. But that's a lot of what we're witnessing. Now, when the right wing says that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, there's simply no foundation for that. I mean, that would be like saying that someone who has a criticism of the late Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe was ipso facto racist, just simply because of that criticism. The Zionism is a political current. It is not a religious current. It is not a current adopted by all Jews. And the idea of this anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is a way of suppressing dissent, which goes to why what happened in Congress, particularly with Stefanik and her persecution of those university professors, presidents, the problem of their response was not that they didn't acknowledge that there were anti-Semitic things that are being said, because there are, largely by right-wingers that are using this. It was that instead of coming back and taking Stefanik off at her knees, politically, of course, they missed a tremendous opportunity. And they allowed the right wing to get away with reinforcing this idea that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Instead of saying, do you want to talk about anti-Semitism? Let's talk about Donald Trump. Let's talk about Charlottesville. Let's talk about the Proud Boys. Do you really want to talk about that, Congresswoman? But as liberals, they do what they do.
Thank you, Bill. I think you've pointed to some of the complexities of this issue and the discussion, debate in the society as a whole. I'd like to welcome Elly here. Welcome, Elly, who's labeled Bill Fletcher, but I believe she is not actually Bill Fletcher.
Oh.
Let me introduce you, Elly, and then I'm going to throw you a question.
Okay, and I'm gonna change my name. If
Because
I
otherwise
can.
we have three Bills on the panel and I'll just lose my mind. But Elly Leary is a longtime labor activist, educator in the US and abroad. She is a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. Elly, welcome.
Thanks.
To throw you a question. We wanted to talk a little bit about and compare maybe the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, with sanctions, the boycotts that were enacted that helped that country struggle. It was used to great effect by the South Africa Communist Party and eventually did lead to the dismantling of apartheid. Can you discuss this strategy and how it can be used to build revolutionary forces today? A United Front strategy helped to build support. Do you see the same thing happening here? In other words, that the BDS movement, is that going to be used? Will that be strengthening the United Front? How do they tie together? And how do you see this struggle developing? And is it parallel to South Africa?
Thanks, Amy, and sorry, folks. My excuse is lame, so I won't even bother with it. I think I would like to take that question from the point of view of Jewish Voices for Peace, since maybe not everybody is part of them, knows too much about them. Do you need me to give a little history of them first, or jump right in, Amy? Give me some direction.
Why don't you give a sentence or two on Jewish Voice for Peace? I'm assuming most people know about them. And then
if everybody does, then we can skip right. If you know about them, raise your hand so I can see.
I think it would be good to share something, Elly.
Okay. Jewish Voices for Peace was started in 1996, kind of after the assassination of the Prime Minister Rabin by a right-wing fanatic. And this was after the Oslo Accords it was unclear how far they would go, but they had been accomplished, that they had been negotiated, and there were steps to bring about a two-state solution. And it was founded by liberals, Tony Kushner, Noam Chomsky, a couple of other Hollywood people, and it was kind of meant to give a different take on the situation. And gradually it changed into an organization first that wasn't explicitly anti-Zionist, but wanted to point out, as Bill and I don't know if you said this, Bill, the fatal flaw in the construction of Israel, which is if you have a Jewish state, they're always on top. They have privileges and preferences that other people do not have. And so, as socialists and as revolutionaries, our whole goal is to create a society where that doesn't exist, where there's equality for all, where there's democracy for all, where you can be who you want to be. So the first thing that Jewish Voices for Peace was tackle the internal policies of Israel, especially after the blockade and what I call, some people call it the open air prison of Gaza. I call it the plantation. You get only what the massa is willing to give you. And they wanted to point out the apartheid nature of it. So they were upping the ante and bringing forward and making parallels to the South African situation. Also at that time, they began a relationship with BDS. In the last 6 or 7 months, there's been a generation change at Jewish Voices for Peace, and the current leaders are in their, I'd say, 40s and 30s, and they are explicitly anti-Zionist. And I'll just tell you what their thing is, that they are in, how they say it, they are in a close alliance. They don't call it a united front with BDS. And their first principle of this alliance is that they are accountable to their Palestinian partners. So that should show you how people are thinking about this thing. And the second thing they want to do, and Bill has talked about this, is to separate anti-Zionism from anti-Semitism. And to me, that has to be the bedrock of any campaign, any building of an alliance. We have to have some principles. And that seems to me to be one of the main things to do. And so they've got the apartheid thing, they have the fatal flaw, they have joint partners to build a society. They have not taken a stand on whether there should be a 1-state or a 2-state. I believe their feeling is that this is part of the self-determination of Palestinians, and as their allies, they will take the lead from them. And if they are asked their opinion, I'm sure they will give one, but it's not for them to decide. So that's among the first things. So I would say, for me, the thing about the BDS was they tried to make it a worldwide thing, disconnected from violence, to try and move public opinion and to change the relationship between the middle forces who said, what the hell's going on, you know? And so I think that that's how we have to see a united front, is to build momentum and to gradually move the ball up the field and in a more revolutionary direction as we move the ball up the field. So I don't know what else you would like me to say, but I want to give people a chance to respond.
Thank you. That was very helpful. We're going to talk a little bit more later about the United Fronts, what they are, what they mean. But I wanted to just pick out one little thread of what you said because it lends itself to the next question. You talked about the new generation leadership of Jewish Voice for Peace, and we're seeing the generational divide on the question of Palestine, that younger folks heard about the Holocaust, maybe from grandparents, whatever, but it hasn't been part of their life experience. Their life experience has been seeing Israel as an aggressor. The generational divide we're also seeing as we approach the 2024 elections. Bill G., I want to ask you a little bit about your take on the upcoming elections. Trump is outwardly making fascist comments, such as talking about concentration camps on the border, killing or arresting political opponents, and getting rid of the vermin, such as Marxists and other leftists. Maybe these are trial balloons. Put it out there and see what the reaction is. Well, frankly, I'm not seeing a reaction of horror. Many young people and Middle Easterners are saying a firm no to Biden based on his support of Israel. I'd like to get your thoughts, Bill, on seeing this through the lens of an international united front against settler colonialism and for Palestinian self-determination, and the united front against fascism here in the United States. Is it a reasonable stance for people to be saying no to Biden at this point, given his horrible position on Israel? What are the implications? Can one be in a united front, an international united front supporting Palestine against international fascism and not be in a united front against Trump?
Yeah, thank you, Amy. I think it's understandable why people feel this way now. I mean, this slaughter of innocents, of children, blown to bits, of hospitals and schools and ambulances, and the content and the scope of this horrible genocide being waged against the Palestinian people, and its consistent support by the Biden administration. It's understandable why people are feeling that way. Anyone with this, you don't have to be a leftist. You just have to have a sense of humanity. So that's totally understandable. I think one of the collateral damages of this is it is obscuring the Trump and right-wing danger. This is something that I think the left has to play a role in doing two things. One, being consistent and strong and united in our support of the Palestinian people in the calls for a ceasefire in our opposition to Zionism. I think, and then that means pressure on our government, on the Biden administration, on this warmongering assault, on the U.S. Military-industrial complex. So I think that has to be unquestioned. We need to be there in our labor unions, in our worker centers, in our mass organizations, on the streets, in the campuses. We need to be there. First, because of our commitment to internationalism and humanity. But secondly, because if we are going to struggle with people to understand the danger that Trump and that right-wing social movement present to all of us and to the world, we have to have the credibility of that stance. We have to show that we are not doing this from the standpoint of tailing after the Democrats for anything they do, of unconditional support for any element of the United Front which is doing something that's wrong, like the Biden administration is doing here. So I think we have to combine our international support and our consistent and aggressive support for the Palestinian struggle for a ceasefire, supporting Jewish Voices for Peace, the labor voices that are speaking out against what's going on in Gaza. But I think we have to make very clear. So now I'm just going to speak here now as my Chicano revolutionary piece. When Trump, we have to take this agenda seriously. It is not a hidden agenda from the right here. It is not a hidden agenda. And the problem with it is not just that Trump is saying very boldly, it's in writing, it's out there in the media. For example, this ethnic cleansing campaign that he wants to undertake against the 12 million undocumented. But the fact that they are preparing all the infrastructure for a new Trump administration so that there will be no guardrails, completely gut Department of Justice and put all of their people on, and they have the people lined up. They're to the right of the Federalist Society. They are recruiting people to take over, just pretty much gut civil service, put them into the Environmental Protection Association, the Department of Interior, Department of Justice, eliminate the Department of Education. They are going to, and he appointed 200 federal judges in his first administration, including the horrendously reactionary Supreme Court majority. This is what they have in mind now. So when they say we are going to use all the powers of the state, and he says it from day one, he said, I'm only going to do it one day. I'm only going to shoot everybody that opposes me. I'm only going to, gut the First Amendment. This is what they have in mind. So it's not just a program, but they're putting the infrastructure in place with support from the Heritage Foundation, with support from, deep pocket billionaires, to put in place an infrastructure to implement a fascist program. So that's what we have to help people understand. And we have to do it in a way that's creative and consistent, but it has to be connected with the fight for a ceasefire in Gaza and for Palestinian rights. We can't just do it on the sideline and, just, you don't get it. We can't tell people you don't get it. So, and it's understandable. I'll just say for me personally, I wish Biden would drop out. I agree with the Fletcher article. It says there should be pressure on Biden to step down. He's toxic. And it's not just on Palestine now. He's ready to cut a deal with the Republicans on immigration. That sounds horrible. It sounds horrible. So I think, the situation is complicated, but, if we're revolutionaries, that's all we know. It's complication and challenge. That's what we do. So, but I think we have to see here, we have to point people out, what is the greater danger? Who gutted women's reproductive rights? With all the, weaknesses of the Democrats, and they supported women's reproductive justice. They don't want to put just corporate people on the National Labor Relations Board. So I think we have to use facts. We have to be creative. I think we really have to elicit the support of celebrities, musicians, actors. I think we really have to get the voices that young people listen to now involved in this united front, and we have to do it. And where my frustration comes in on all of this is that the left is still disunited. I don't know if it's like when we're finally going to start talking to each other about how we can work together. Liberation Road and Left Roots and the Communist Party and all of the groups, the DSA. Why aren't we talking about how we're going to work together in this enormous humanitarian crisis? What the hell is wrong with us?
Thank you, Bill. I was listening to the news the other day, and they were interviewing a young woman at a Palestinian support rally. And she was basically, I will never vote for Biden. Never. Nobody I know will vote for Biden. And she said, so Trump gets in for 4 years. We deal with him for 4 years and then somebody else. I think that the big concern over Trump and the fairly explicitly fascist agenda, he may not go after 4 years. I mean, the damage they're talking about doing may just change things so much that it's not like a next election 4 years. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, Amy, that stuff, I understand the sentiment, but people don't. I mean, just take when he says that he is going to ethnically cleanse, deport 12 million people. That's not just those 12 million. That's their family, their friends, their social organizations, their unions, their community groups, their faith groups. It will disrupt the lives of 100 million people in the most horrible way possible. Children will not know if their parents are going to come home from work or school or not. They're going to set up mass incarceration camps along the border. So I think folks that say that, they need to understand exactly what this means in terms of people's lives.
Thank you. I would expect that people really want to talk about this, and I would like to hear from people who are attending today. I want to ask one last question that I'd like all of you to weigh in on, and I think it will lead to this discussion. We on this call are all leftists of one sort or another. It's pretty clear that the US left is not united and is actually in disarray. We are seeing thousands, millions of people domestically and around the world calling for justice for Palestine. On my Signal chat here in Connecticut, young folks are proclaiming, we need a revolution now. We have seen many mass movements have a lot of steam, then die down. I'm thinking of Occupy, the massive uprisings after the George Floyd murder, Me Too. I'd like to get your thoughts on where the left is at today. And are we likely to see the same rise in activity only to have it fade away? We saw this as the result of the absence of a united left organizational structure to channel this energy into an ongoing revolutionary movement. Has the situation changed? And if not, what can and should be the role of revolutionary people now? Do we have any hope at this point? Can we use this moment of incredible uprising, anger, and desire for change to help build the revolutionary left infrastructure that we need? I'd like each of you to give your thoughts on this. Elly, would you like to go first?
Well, I guess it's a trick question, because there is, because there's multiple answers and multiple ways to enter that discussion. And the answer is, of course, we need to be united. Of course, we're disunited. Of course, historical fault lines continue to simmer and to grow large. And I think I just want to follow up on what Bill said. I think that the major fault line that we have to overcome in this specific period is, we all agree we have to build the social movements. That is the unity of the left, and that we need to gather our forces, build our forces, educate our forces, multiply our forces. But I think the fault line lies in, is there an electoral component? And too many have taken, who were kind of on the fence, and they look at Biden, they say, see, that's a fucked up thing. You can't have, there's no electoral possibility here. He's an asshole. He's this, he's that. The Democrats are all, corporate liberals. They're all the things that we know are true. But nonetheless, we have staring us in the face imminent fascism of the American time. It's not going to look like what Germany looked like. Bill, I think, Gallegos has described the current features of what it's going to be. The scapegoating, the complete rupture of any checks and balances in the system. Like day one is Trump appoints everybody he's going to appoint, and there's no Senate confirmation. That's the deal. If and they'll be used like toilet paper if they don't toe the line. So I think that's the major rupture that we have to figure out how to overcome. That yes, our whole game is situated in the social movements, but we have to engage the bourgeois and the right in some arena. And the only one we really have now is the electoral arena. And we have, in the past, I certainly was one of those people who just said, oh, screw them. They're all, and like you looked at Bill Clinton and you wanted to say, you mean you're asking me to vote for him for the Supreme Court? That's all I get out of this. So I think that somehow we have to get people to understand that this has to be part of our game plan.
Thank you, Elly. One of the Bills, would you like to give your thoughts on the state of the left today, where we need to be?
Sure. So first of all, I don't talk with people that right now that are saying that they aren't going to vote for Biden in November about it, because I don't think that there's much of a point. By which I mean, November is 11 months away. Biden could, Trump could be in jail or something. We could be up against Nikki Haley or, any number of possibilities. And there's also a lot of panic, and there's been an immense amount of panic for months around this election. Right now, we need to be hammering this administration around what's happening in Gaza. And we also have to be, and this is, in line with Elly and BG, we also have to be working to build a broad front to oppose the right. And we're going to have to do this. We're going to be having to walk on two legs. There's just no way around it. And there's in 2020, we did not elect a socialist. We did not elect a social democrat. We did not elect a leftist. It's not even like in France when they elected Hollande a few years ago and then he betrayed the left. We knew exactly who this guy was. And one of the problems is that many people seem to have forgotten, out of their antipathy for Trump, that we did not elect one of our own. We elected someone else, and we elected him as part of a blocking operation against a particular demon. But we did not elect him because of the great promise. Now, I think that this speaks to what is critical here for us as a left, which is not only building a broad front, but we have to articulate a different vision, and it has to play itself out where where we are organizing. That we have a different idea of an alternative. It's not simply, we're not people that are calling for the protection of the status quo. We're talking about going beyond the status quo. And as crazy as this may sound, I think that there's analogies to what Tito did in Yugoslavia in World War II and what Mao did in China at the same time. That is that while, like if you look at Yugoslavia, Tito and others were not calling for a restoration of the monarchy. They were calling for a different kind of Yugoslavia while they were fighting the fascists. Mao and others were not calling for a restoration of Chiang Kai-shek and others. They were calling for a different kind of China. We have to be talking about a different vision that for this country, and that needs to be at the center of the United Front work that we're doing. But right now, we really do need to be hammering this administration around Palestine. And one final comment. One of the big mistakes that happened in the 1930s, after the 7th Congress of the Communist International, when there was the United Front Against Fascism, is that many forces on the left in the colonial and semi-colonial world felt like they were basically being told to tone down their anti-imperialism. It led people like George Padmore to leave the Comintern and others who basically felt like they were as anti-fascist as the next person, but they wanted to continue the fight against colonialism and against imperialism. In fact, I discovered Padmore had this really interesting thing he said about the Spanish Civil War, where he basically said, and I wish I could quote him exactly, but he basically said that the Spanish Republic might have been in a better position to save itself had it liberated Spanish-controlled Africa, instead of taking a pass on decolonization. In other words, that this fight against fascism needed to be linked to the fight against colonialism and imperialism. And I think that is what needs to guide us.
Well put. Yeah, I agree with that. Bill G, would you weigh in on your thoughts on the left, where we're at, how we participate in this moment?
Yeah, but I was wondering if I just saw some folks are starting to raise their hands to speak, and I saw Carl Davidson's hand up. Would you mind to jump to him?
Yeah. Carl, you want to take the stage here?
Well, I don't know if I have anything all that more incisive to say than what's been done, but I will say a few things. I think when people say that they'll never vote for Biden, the thing I would say is I understand why you don't want to vote for Biden. But I would also argue that he's not the only person on the field. And what I would do then is do more education about Trump and Trump's view on the Middle East. And not only on the Middle East, but also what it means domestically. Because I think that they may understand. I say, you understand about Biden very well, but he's not the only player on the field. It's important for you to understand the entire terrain. And that means you have to study Trump more. And you have to understand what Trump's views are. I also might argue that they have to understand that there's a difference between Biden and Bibi, and that those differences are coming to the fore too. And there's going to be sharp divisions within Israel and between the United States and Israel in the coming days. And we need to be astute about those as well. The ones I've found in my experience that are most astute about these things are the Palestinian Americans themselves. I work with a large concentration of them. And well, I found people taking all sorts of far left positions. They'd never do this and never do that. The Palestinians I knew were much more astute and much more, they might be more, and they express their anger very clearly, that's for sure. But their astuteness in terms of who to vote for and who not to vote for, and they very rarely said they would never vote, was also very sharp. So I think Bill makes an excellent point in that there's a lot of time between now and the next fall, and lots going to happen. And some of these contradictions are going to come out. Our role, and you know, the left has always been divided, but it's not so much that we're building a united front. I think Jerry Harris made a point once that was not the best nomenclature. What we're building is a common front, or a common effort even. It's not necessarily that we're meeting and sitting down and establishing a common program. But within that common effort, there's nothing that says that we have to keep our mouths shut on Gaza. Just the opposite. We need to make crystal clear what our views are, and we need to point to a different alternative. We don't necessarily have to say, well, I think Bill's point is a good one. The future that we want to point to is not necessarily the dictatorship of the proletariat. I don't think that's what we need to be talking about. I think we need to be talking about what we're fighting for as a form of transition is a government of the third reconstruction. That's what we want. That's what our aim is. And the way we do that is by expanding the forces that hold to that, especially the squad. Those are the ones that agree with us around the question of the third reconstruction and the forces of it, and then bringing those forces to power. That's not going to happen all at once, but that's the vision. I think the new vision that we have to create in terms of the kind of radical democracy that's implied in that, and we need to argue for that in what we're doing, and we need to make sure that people understand the complexity of our political system. That's one reason I put out my 6-party system hypothesis every few years. I write in January, I'm going to have to rewrite it again because the terrain keeps changing. I can't come up with just one formula that's going to hold for a long time. Forever, everything's changing, so I have to work it out again and understand the exact forces that are out there. So that's what I think we have to do. We have this revolutionary education, the task of it, building the organization, understanding. You know, I make the point often that politics in our country is in 2 big camps. There's the camp of politics as self-expression, and there's a camp of politics as strategy. A lot of people who say, I'll never vote for Biden, they're giving the kind of politics as self-expression. And these 2 categories are not necessarily bad all the time. You flip from one to the other. But right now, what we have to do is win people away step by step from a politics as self-expression to a politics as strategy.
Thank you, Carl. I think that I feel people are starting to chomp at the bit in terms of they've got questions, they've got comments. So Bill G, if you can, if you have any comments, put them into this next section, sorry. And let's move to some feedback from the people who are listening here. We have some questions in the chat. Let's see. I think we'll go to Michael's question first. Michael, would you like to ask this, or do you want me to just read it directly from the chat?
From the chat's fine. I'm just finding my time here to be very well spent so far. I appreciate the invitation.
We're so glad you could join us, and your first meeting here, terrific. So he's asking about how do we talk to people about these mass casualties, the genocide? See, and that the only way to deal with this is to eradicate Hamas. So I guess you're asking, what are the strategies to actually deal with this in terms of the role of Hamas? And
yeah, I'll frame it up. So what I'm hearing is that people that I think have honest intentions are saying, if Hamas is this self-stated, we exist to obliterate Israel, how do you get rid of Hamas? And I know there's some people here that are saying that's not the approach. Don't get rid of Hamas, work with it politically. But, with Hamas's statement that their purpose is for Israel to not exist, and then, justifying this horrific, just the immense devastation on people, mostly women and children, that's a result of it, saying, well, they have to do that because Hamas is so embedded in the civilian structures, the hospitals, the mosques, all of these things. There's no other way to deal with them. And I don't know how to answer that. And I find myself, kind of shrugging my shoulders, and I try to bring value when I have these kind of important conversations, and I'm at a loss. So I'm looking for some ideas and guidance.
thank you, Michael. I see a couple of hands raised. I'm guessing people want to address this. I saw Rick and then Larry. Rick, do you want to unmute and say something?
Yeah, well, I put in the chat note a couple of points, which I think one way to look at, I share the, obviously what Bill said at the beginning, that there's no justification for the atrocities and the war crimes that Hamas committed. That said, it's instructive to step back and look at who supported Hamas, who created the way for Hamas. And we know that Israel was bringing agents of the Qatari government in to distribute money in Palestine to Hamas or through Hamas. We know that Israel had uncovered Hamas's financial infrastructure. I just put the link to the Times article up there. In other words, and we know that Netanyahu's coalition described Hamas as an asset, while the PLO was liability. So the point is, having a negotiating partner that is totally rejecting any position that, or is taking the position that Hamas is what serves the current regime in Israel. So I won't ramble on. Those are the points of information that people might find useful. So.
Okay. Larry?
Yeah, well, this has been great, and I've learned a lot. In terms of the Hamas thing, I know, so I've been active in Jewish Voice for Peace for 6-7 years now. And, it comes up a lot about how do we talk about Hamas. And actually, for the first few days, JVP wouldn't say anything about Hamas, about the attack. Their positions changed in their talking points, which I support, which is to do what Bill Gallegos did at the beginning of this meeting, just to acknowledge it as an atrocity and move on. And frankly, the more Israel bombs the shit out of Gaza, the atrocity starts to pale a little bit. We're talking about killing 18,000 people. But the other thing, it's not like you're going to capture this guerrilla group, and somehow put them out of business. It doesn't happen that way. there'll be more supporters of Hamas in Gaza now than ever before. May not be called Hamas even, it may change, but there'll be something until there's, because you have a bankrupt leadership in the Palestinian Authority. And as I read polls and talk to people, there is support in Palestine for Hamas. Maybe not uncritical. A lot of people are afraid of them, but they say, God damn it, at least they're doing something. They're attacking Israel. So I think that sentiment is going to remain and actually increase with all this bombing. So the idea that you can find all these Hamas people and kill them or put them in jail, and then somehow their movement will be gone, it's not going to happen. So it's a political situation that we have to deal with, and so we have to deal with it politically. And I think, and I don't think if someone after a discussion of what Israel has done, if someone is still harping on, the only people I know who still harp on Hamas's atrocious action after you have that discussion are folks who are just diehard Zionist Jews who are are still drinking the Kool-Aid. I think other people respond.
Okay, I'm going to call on Dave and Bill, and I also would like to see if we can, in our comments, also be thinking about as leftists. Many of us are actually Marxist-Leninists, so a particular school of thought. What can we and what are we bringing to the table that is different maybe than other forces? And going back to the question of, in this moment, how can we use this to organize our revolutionary forces so we don't see this huge uprising of activity, which then dies away? David and then Bill.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to first echo the sentiment that, getting rid of Biden, I think it's good, trying to get rid of Biden and getting somebody else, because in my opinion, against Trump, he's not going to win it. And, but I think that getting young folks, I work with young folks, a couple of them can't be here because they're in the middle of this action today. But the best, I've been trying to convince them, to not abandon whatever Democrats they come up with, if it's Biden or whatever. And the reason for that is because I feel that, at all costs, we have to prevent a Trump administration. And I think that one of the arguments that I came up with, it's like, I try different things because, like when you do union organizing, you have to rehearse, you do role play. That's the best way really to learn. That is the best way to learn because it's right on the street. It's where the rubber meets the road. It's not in Zoom discussions. You're actually trying to win people over, right? So it's a really good practice. So one of the things that I've done is, and I don't know how much impact it makes, but these are talking with young activists who study Marxism. I say, hey, did you know that in China, workers and peasants, they didn't write the KMT. They're the historic oppressors. And when Mao said we have to be in a united front, people said, hey, fuck you, we're not doing that, But it was only when he started talking about, my wife, got decapitated in front of my second son. My second wife got decapitated by the KMT. Then other people started thinking, well, hey, if you could go through something like that, well, maybe, maybe I could, And so I think that discussion turned some heads, turned one person's head. Again, I don't know how much it takes to convince people. And luckily, I'm in a situation where I'm doing mass work with the people. So it's not like one conversation, because you can't do it in one conversation. You have to do it over a series, over time, right? You can't just win anybody over to anything at one time. So I think that kind of thing worked. And I think that, what other people are saying, Bill, Fletcher, and others were saying about talking about the horrificness of the right is also important. Because right now, if you notice, the right is really, really into Iran, bombing Iran, Everything comes down to Hezbollah, Hamas. They're all puppets of Iran. Okay? Biden is not doing as much, but sort of, kind of does it along too. And that's another difference that I think is very important about the difference between some of them. So those are some of the arguments. It's still a work in progress. It will be a continual work in progress until November elections, 10 months away or whatever it is. But, I think if we try to figure out the best arguments and how to persuade people. It's the only thing that we could do, I think.
Thank you, David.
Mhm.
We have about 15 minutes. The last 5, we're going to be doing a little quick survey. So maybe 10 minutes more discussion. Bill Gallegos, would you like to unmute and speak?
Well, just in terms of this question about Hamas, it's interesting that the Israelis seem to be following the Russian model that they used against Chechnya, which is destroy all, kill all, demolish all. They're very much following the Putin model for how you deal with the national liberation movement. In terms of the solution, I mean, it's really difficult to say because we're not there, but I would say the starting point has to be end the occupation and recognize Palestinian rights. That's because they may destroy Hamas. It's possible, but then there will be Islamic State. There will be something as long as this oppression, dispossession, apartheid, inequality, just as long as that continues, there will be some form of resistance, including armed resistance. So the only really solution to this is a political solution, which is the world community has been saying for years. UN resolutions and international resolutions, and the United States government itself has said there has to be an end to the occupation and there has to be a recognition of Palestinian rights. And what that's going to look like has to be a product of real serious negotiations. For us here, I think for those of us on the left, I think it's important to kind of go back to the basics. At the heart of this is a capitalism. At the heart of all of this national oppression of what's going on with Israel, what's going on in the Middle East, the threats to Mexico, the blockade of Cuba. At the heart of that is a system which is based on exploitation and oppression for the absolute goal of maximizing profit. And I think this is, in the work that we're doing, I think there's an opportunity for us now to really help people go beyond. It's not just the Netanyahu government. It's not just the Biden administration. It's not just the military-industrial complex. There is a system that denies you health care, that is cutting off the right to vote, that wants to completely end any kind of women's liberation and women's reproductive justice. That's at the heart of the mass incarceration system that we have, that is killing poultry workers in the South. All of the things that are part of everyday's lives and that we experience in all the work that we do, whether you're working in a union or a worker center, or a community organization, or an independent political organization, these are the issues through which we have to connect the larger question, the deeper question of what's at the heart of this. And then I think it has to do with what Bill and Carl were talking about, in which some organizations have offered. What's our perspective? What can replace this? Is there really no alternative, as Margaret Thatcher said, or is there an alternative? And if there is an alternative, what is it? And this whole thing about the elections it's not just about Biden versus Trump. It's what gives us the political space to organize for that kind of fundamental social transformation. What gives us the space so that we're not doing that organizing from prison cells and concentration camps? That's the questions we have to answer.
Mhm.
But I think, again, Liberation Road can do it. Left Roots can do it, the Communist Party. If we were working together, we could have more capacity and probably do it more effectively and reach more people. So I want to emphasize that point. But Amy asked me to address something earlier on in this, which is we need our own political force, whether it's a united party, a united left, some type of organization which can speak for working people and the oppressed to help them fight for that new society. We need that. That's still, we used to call it central task. I don't know what the nomenclature is now, but we need some kind of effective political organization which can work effectively within these broader united fronts.
Susan, I see your hand, but I want to ask you a question, Bill. So what is the difference? Are you describing another mass organization, an independent political organization? Well, what are you saying we need at this point, though? Do we just need to build up what we have? That's to you, Bill. Gee.
Oh, I thought you were talking to Susan.
Oh, she's gonna go next. Susan next.
Oh, no, I think, the ruling class has their political parties. The Republican Party has been taken completely over by the right, but they have one. They have a political organization that works in all 50 states at the federal level, the local level. We need something, and it's not just for electoral work, but something that can connect our labor organizing and our community organizing and our climate justice work. We need something where people who feel like, I want a society that's rooted in democracy, equality, and peace, where those folks can come together and we can work together.
Thank you. Susan, you want to unmute and speak?
Yeah. I completely agree with what Bill just said. And I think he's talking about a party, a party led by the working class. Sometimes people are afraid to use the terms of the old left, but that's what we need. This is a side point. I don't want to get off of what Bill just said, if we're going to, have more discussion about that. But just one point I wanted to make about Hamas and thinking that we are going to, or that the Israelis are actually going to eliminate it. This is something I just heard this morning, and I don't have all the backup data or information, but apparently it is not a crime against humanity, as horrendous as what Hamas did. This is a captive population. They are in prison. This is a prison rebellion. And it does not fall under international law in the way that what the Israelis are doing does. And I think we should just keep that in mind. It's not to justify it. It's just to say that it is considered legitimate by international law for people to fight against their captivity. So that's my comment.
We're coming up on the time we were going to do our feedback survey. Would anyone who hasn't spoken or asked a question, if you have anything on your mind, you can drop it in the chat or raise your hand. I'm pretty sure in the history of the world, we have not had a room with 37 leftists where we don't have comments to come out. But maybe this is a first.
Could you clarify what you're asking for? Sorry, are you asking for feedback on this session or
Well,
something else? Or
yeah, no, we have a feedback form which is going to be online in a minute. What I'm just asking is people who haven't talked yet, who may have a question in their mind, a thought. Thank you, Michael. Now's your chance. Raise your hand, put your question in. It's kind of last call, basically. Okay, seeing none.
We could pass the plate.
We can pass the plate. I just want to sum up some of the main points that I think we got out of today, and then Don will throw up the feedback form. So the LRS History Group wanted to sponsor this today to talk specifically about an organization and pulling together the left in this moment as we have incredible uprising around the world condemning the assault on Gaza. We've talked a lot about united fronts, and the united front is not always an actual thing that everybody in it would know. It's just objectively true. There is a united front internationally against fascism. The Gaza struggle is part of it. Our struggle here in the US, that's part of it. We didn't get much into internationalism, but maybe for another day. We talked a little bit about the elections, and that too is very much united front and some tricky questions here. I see Jamala's hands raised. Jamala, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I was just, I know we're wrapping up and I was trying to get in there, but I forgot to take my mute off. But I wanted to revisit Bill's point about the left working together. Those of us on this call, and this was not supposed to be a wide net that was cast. We really wanted to be a targeted audience, and I know that was for a reason. But why can't we get together and work on these issues to have a conversation? There are people on this call that are part of each one of those organizations that Bill talked about. And so, we can theoretically and rhetorically ask the question, but why can't we make that happen? We're in those organizations. The SOS, process just ended. So they might have a little bit more time to engage in this kind of conversation. But it's the one thing I think we haven't done well in the last 20 years.
Thank you. Okay, Don, are you ready to put up the feedback form? Okay, it's in the.
Yeah, actually, it's very it's timely that Jamal raises this point, because the survey that I put a link to in the chat actually is going to ask people's interest in pursuing further conversations. So if you could all look for that link, and I decided to do that instead of the post-meeting survey, because that can only open up after the meeting closes. So this way you can fill it out at your leisure, but hopefully you'll spend a few minutes right now. It's not very long, and just to find out, what people felt about this forum. If you have questions, you could put the questions in there, or if you want to pursue further conversation, then you can indicate that in the survey form.
So if people don't do it now, how do they get to it after?
The link is in the chat, so you can, as long as you have the link, save it, and then you can. It's basically a Google form, but try to fill it out now, because generally people wait and they never fill it out.
Okay. Could I then call for everyone to do the link in the chat and take 2 minutes to fill it out, and then we'll come back to this body?
Maybe someone could share some music for us.
We're busy filling out our form.
I think that as organizers and activists, we all know the danger of having people take something away and then sort of forget to send it back, which is why we're pushing this here and now. Did people pretty much finish that up?
I got mine done.
I'm going to take that to be yes. This was sort of an invitation only thing, so everyone on this call knows somebody or other. We'd love for you to contact us after and talk more, and we hope to have more of these. As you can see, the LRS History Group we're an older crowd, but we're very, very much interested in making ties and hearing from younger generations. of activists, leftists, whatever. What is your world like? What are you experiencing? What are your questions? What are your thoughts? It's a mutual experience of going back and forth, learning from each other. So on that happy note, I would like to thank you all for giving up part of your Saturday afternoon. It's been a very interesting and informative discussion. And I hope to see you all again.
Thanks a lot, Amy. Thanks, everyone.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carry
Thank
on.
you.
You all have a happy holiday.
Yeah. all of it.
Indeed.
Mhm.